Não, eu posso ir. Olha, nós entretanto vamos começar, porque provavelmente muitos colegas só vêm depois do coffee break. Pronto. Então, eu não sei se vocês sabem, hoje comemora-se o Dia Mundial da Água e é a primeira vez que está a ser organizado aqui pela Universidade de Aveiro, nomeadamente por nós que somos do Departamento de Biologia, e é um evento à escala mundial. Pronto. E o que as Nações Unidas pretendem com este tipo de evento é, de certa forma, sensibilizar as pessoas para os problemas que estão relacionados com a água. Hoje em dia, ouvimos com bastante frequência nos meios de comunicação social os problemas relacionados com a falta de água ou, até em alguns locais, problemas relacionados com o excesso de água, como as cheias, inundações, etc. Mas muito mais do que a quantidade de água é também a qualidade da própria água, quer para nós, para o nosso bem-estar, como para os ecossistemas. Então foi com esse intuito que nós decidimos organizar este dia e nós escolhemos umas quantas palestras que refletem isso e nós esperamos que vocês gostem, tanto como nós, dos temas que escolhemos. E vamos começar com a doutora Ana, que é a investigadora principal do CESAM e do DBio, e que nos vai falar sobre a missão do CESAM neste contexto da água. Okay, obrigada.
Bom dia. A mim foi-me dito que era para falar em inglês. É para falar em inglês ou português?
Não, em inglês.
Okay, good morning. Thank you. Thank you very much for your invitation and for taking part of this initiative. And I know that it's been emitted in streaming, so we have people attending remotely. I will try to give an overview of CESAM's mission regarding the water management. Of course, the examples that I will give are a little bit more restricted because, as you will see, CESAM has a broad range of expertise. So I try to, and there were other CESAM researchers giving their presentations, so I try to focus on those where I'm mostly involved. Eu tinha ponteiro. I'm sorry, I had a pointer. Yeah. So just to give you an overview for those who are not so familiar with our research center. So we are around 450 researchers. We cover 5 departments of the University of Aveiro. We have also some researchers from the University of Lisbon, one from Instituto Ricardo Jorge, also in Lisbon, and one from Porto. But one of the interesting things is we cover a broad range of expertise. You can see that we have studies on not only the hydrosphere, the water-related sphere, but also lithosphere, atmosphere, so the different environmental compartments. And CESAM has expertise on fundamental science, but also applied science and natural science and also social science. So we can gather all this expertise and a broad range of researchers. And one of the missions of CESAM is this environmental research, and you can see that it covers from catchment to the deep sea. So when we think about the water cycle, we have research involved in freshwater ecosystems, coastal zones, in transitional waters, but we cover all the way until the deep sea. Of course, and when you think about, for instance, water management and freshwater management, you can have different approaches from the environmental perspective, but also, for instance, circular economy perspective, or chemical or physical, more physical or chemical perspective. And you intend, at the end, to contribute to human well-being and to a sustainable development. And in frame with the climate action or climate change, so all these actions for adaptation or mitigation to climate change, which is also related to the water cycle, as it was mentioned. We have these floods, we have changes in the hydrology of ecosystems. Just to give you a broad view, we have 4 thematic lines, and in one of them here, you can see that it's ecology and functional biodiversity. Here we try to cover the ecosystem functions, the ecosystem processes, which can also be related to the water cycle. Here we have environmental biology and health, and you can see if you have, for instance, antibiotics or emergent contaminants in the environment, it will have implications on environmental biology, but also in health. And here we can think about human health or the health of the ecosystem. Then you have the same for the marine environment. And then you have these integrated environmental systems where you try to scale up and to gather the information by doing modeling or by doing applying nature-based solutions or climate change adaptation measures, for instance. Just to show you some of the facilities or infrastructures within CESAM. So we have the different departments. We have high-performance computational systems, if you have big data sets, for instance, for modeling or for other studies. And you have the main building and other facilities for CESAM. Coming to the topic and the kind of approach that we can do in CESAM. Like it was mentioned, water is needed for a sustainable world, but you need to have an integrated perspective. So you have to consider society as you are considering human well-being, but of course you have to consider economy and all the human activities related, and of course the integrated management of water resources, and then you have the environment. And although SEASAM is the research center for environmental studies and marine studies, but in this case I will focus on water, you cannot take out all the other disciplines and the other perspectives. So if you have here an overview of the percentage of population using unimproved drinking water source, and you can see that this is a global issue. And if you think about the Sustainable Development Goals, we will focus mostly on these Sustainable Goal 6, water, clean water and sanitation. How can we link these to the main CESAM activities? We can think about the environment and, for instance, wetlands as natural decontamination ecosystems. So you can have groundwater flow, you can have surface water flow, you have the rule of vegetation, rooted vegetation, but you also have the biogeochemical process getting in the interface of sediment and the water column, and then you have a natural cleaning source, an ecosystem services provided by these wetlands. So, and I will focus then on this target that is 6.6, which is clean ecosystems. So if we think about CESAM and from the 17 Sustainable Development Goals, we can see that we cover a broad range of them due to our broad range of expertise. And if we think specifically on the Sustainable Development Goal 6, we can see that they are all linked and they all somehow contribute to this. So we cannot take the Sustainable Development Goals apart from each other. So if we think specifically on the target 6.6 here, the cleaner ecosystems, then we can put all the spheres of expertise of CESAM. So we have here on the basis the Sustainable Development Goals regarding the natural science, but as we climb up, we go to the anthroposphere with the contribution of social science. So here we can clearly see how CESAM can contribute in an integrative perspective to the Sustainable Development Goals, and how it can also contribute to the clean water and sanitation. And now I will give just a few examples of specific projects, and most of these projects, all of them, not most, but all of them involved researchers from different research groups and different researchers from CESAM, I will say, main departments. So these were not only multidisciplinary approaches, but also transdisciplinary research. Why? Because this involved also stakeholders. So it involved the society and it involved researchers. And in this first one, there was not this economical perspective, but we have been moving forward to this also to integrate the economic perspective. So one of the main policies regarding the water management is the Water Framework Directive, and in this case also on the context of climate change. So this is the report for the National Approach for Climate Change. And here we studied from catchment to the lagoon, so to the coastline. So we integrated the entire information to contribute to the implementation, effective implementation of the Water Framework Directive. And we published this book in Portuguese also for the stakeholders, which is still available online. Also, so we had different scenarios. This is the integrated management scenario where we had future prospective scenarios for management, for the integrated management of this region, considering the scenarios from the catchment, changes in, for instance, land use change or water uses change, and then the effects on the lagoon area and how it could be management in a more integrated perspective. And then we also published a book in English considering other systems involved in this project. But then we can also consider the Water Framework Directive and the climate change. In this case, it was specific for a region here in Aveiro, where we also involved the stakeholders. And here we were discussing the perception of stakeholders regarding the water management of the region, also in the context of climate change, because one of the main issues are the flood events, but also the flood events from upstream, from the river, but also the saltwater intrusion from the lagoon, which have effects on human activities, for instance, agriculture. So this is also about water management and ecosystem management. And what we then produced was a policy brief where we have the spatial planning regulations, where we consider the spatial planning regulations for climate change adaptation in this Voga River. And we consider then, of course, the local, the regional, and the national plans. But here again, we consider the water resources, of course, the coastal areas, because this also involves the management of the saltwater, and biodiversity, because we have to consider the entire ecosystem for the management purpose. I forgot to say, but here it was also related to the construction of a flood bank to regulate this water management. And then more recently, we included, so we still have the Water Framework Directive as one of the main water-related policies. The climate change, because if we want to do a management perspective, we have to take into account this context, but also biodiversity strategy. Here we have we were in a Natura 2000, in our case study, Natura 2000 area. It's all this. So we have the Natura 2000 area from the river, Pateira de Fermentelos, freshwater, here the lagoon, and here the coastal area, and also, of course, the marine strategy. And in this project, this Aquacross project, the main issue, and we added on the previous projects, is the continuum, because, of course, we want to manage the water resources, but we need to remind that there is a continuum regarding the different realms, aquatic realms. For instance, eel is a good example, because you have the connection from the Sargasso Sea until the rivers, where you catch them for human consumption, but you also have a lot of cultural services associated, and that's why these coastal regions are quite complex, and you need always to consider them as socio-ecological systems in the management perspective. And here, in this case, our national case study, we had, and I forgot to say, I'm only showing what we consider as national case studies because it's from the region. There were all other case studies regarding these projects. And here, in the case of aquacross, the main goal was to promote integrated or ecosystem-based management of these aquatic ecosystems. In our case study, it was to apply this to this continuum from freshwater to marine waters, considering also the lagoon system. So we have all these policies, we have the engagement of stakeholders, we applied modeling tools, and we applied a lot of prospective scenarios for the different management options, to discuss different management options and prospective scenarios. So at the end, we published also a book in Portuguese, where you can see here illustrated that stakeholders were really discussing the maps and discussing the activities, because then we were identifying the main pressures, the main activities, the main ecosystem services, and then we were discussing the trade-offs from freshwater systems, the lagoon, and the marine area. But then how we can use also all this information. And again, in my specific experience from all these wetlands, then I have also been applying this ecological knowledge on nature-based solutions. Because this first picture that I showed you, how wetlands can work, lately I've been also applying this knowledge to aquaponics, to treat these can be applied to freshwater ecosystems or to saltwater ecosystems, but apply this knowledge to clean water and again to manage water resources. So you give me 15 minutes, so I'm finishing. So you have a lot of publications also regarding all this, and you can see that many researchers from CESAM, from different departments, different background expertise have been involved. So there's a huge team involved in all these projects. And thank you. Questions now or at the end?
Does anybody want to do the rest, please? Okay. So I guess we can pass to Dr. Peter. He's a researcher at the Department of Environmental and Planning, CESAM, and he will present a lecture called Welfare Gains from Water Quality Improvement Across Terrestrial, Freshwater and Coastal Socio-Ecological Systems.
Yes. Let's just see which one is the pointer. That one. Okay. Very good. Well, first of all, I would like to thank the organization for inviting me for presenting something about the work we have been doing over the last decade or decades even. So thank you for putting in all the effort. What I will be talking about is more from a very much economic perspective on integrated water resources management in socio-ecological systems. And I will be focusing mainly on some of the work I have been doing and continue to be doing in relation to water resources management in the Great Barrier Reef region in Australia. Anna already mentioned a lot of work we've been doing in Portugal. And I just wanted to give a little bit of a perspective on the other side of the world. So what I want to talk about here is what Anna already mentioned, is relationship between what we do on the land, all these activities, all the economic activities that have their economic benefits, but also have their economic impacts. There's externalities, there's pollution happening, all kinds of pollutions, and that end up in the aquatic ecosystems, end up in the coastal ecosystems, end up in the marine ecosystems. Now, in all these systems, there's different stakeholders that benefit from water resources directly or indirectly. So we need to be aware of this link between what happens on the land, what happens in the aquatic, and what happens in the coastal and marine areas, and see to what extent this pollution makes sense, yes or no, from, as I say, an economic perspective. So it's important to make this relationship between terrestrial to coast and marine. Now, from an economic perspective, what we want is really to, let's say, maximize welfare from reducing water pollution, or as I would put politically incorrectly, the welfare gains from pollution. So to what extent should we allow pollution, or to what extent can we gain from reducing pollution? And that would be overall welfare maximizing. So that's what we would aim for from an economic or soft sustainability perspective. Okay, now, this kind of idea has obviously been recognized in Australia as an important issue. So we have the Reef Water Quality Protection Plan, the Reef Rescue Plan 1 and 2. So we've been working towards, let's say, contributing to water quality improvement in this very sensitive ecosystem. Now, unfortunately, despite all the work we've done, and I will show quite a bit of the work that we've been doing in this sense, and this is a picture from 2017, these efforts have not really resulted in the kind of water quality improvement and the reduction in sensitivity of these systems to all kinds of events. So here you've got a picture of the systems, or the corals that have been affected by coral bleaching in 2017. If I would have put, and I couldn't find it quickly, a picture of 2018 over it, you will see that there is 2/3 of the reef is affected by bleaching. Now, when I saw this news the last 2 years, I was very disappointed, because we've done a lot of work in order to try to get things moving in the right direction. And I will show you a little bit what we've been trying to use as arguments how to improve the system. And what we've been focusing on when we talk to decision makers is to what extent can we gain from water quality improvement. This is the easiest way to convince policymakers to actually change, to provide incentives to make that change happen. So we identified 5, in this case, elements or motives that we can use, economic motives that we can use in order to benefit from water quality improvement. So that's, first of all, it's within an industry or within a sector, trying to look for most cost-effective, let's say, best management practices. So that's adaptation strategies that result in improved water quality and eventually even an increase in productivity. Then we can also look at inter-industry, so between different sectors. So to what extent can we benefit from being smart in allocating or distributing these efforts for water quality improvement across industries? Third, what kind of incentives can we use? So first, so we can identify what would be the best thing to do, how can we do things most cost effectively, and how can we obtain the largest benefits. The other aspect is how do we convince the actual stakeholders or the actual sectors in the industry to change their behavior. So we can also be smart in identifying incentives that are more or less effective or cost effective in convincing stakeholders to change. Then there's also, and Anna also mentioned that we can reduce pollution at the source, but we can also treat water downstream. And one of the treatment options that we have are, for example, wetlands. So to what extent do these two contribute to water quality improvement? And finally, full water benefit valorization. So it's not only about the benefits to the reef, but it's also all the other benefits that we can obtain from water quality improvement in the aquatic ecosystems, in the freshwater systems, in the coastal, in the lagoon systems, etc. It's all these multiple benefits that multiply through the system. Okay. So what we really want to do here is, this morning what I want to present is, all the evidence that we have at our hands that shows to what extent we actually can gain from water quality improvement in these kind of systems. So the first motive was the intra-industry prioritization. So I'm just going to, because I've got a little bit less time than I expected. So what I want to focus on here is to what extent can we, within an industry, within a sector, within the agriculture sector, this is diffuse source water pollution, how can we smartly identify the location of best management practices, so practices that reduce pollution and at the same time produce sufficient primary product. How can we best distribute these practices across the landscape? Where is it smart to use which practices? So we developed an environmental economic spatial investment prioritization model that includes a crop growth simulation model, water quality model, and a land use model, and integrates these three into an integrated land use and water quality model. Now what this model actually in essence does, it allocates the land use and management practices across the landscape such that it provides largest overall welfare benefits to the sector, so the agriculture sector in this case. Now, so what we see here, as for in this case, the sugarcane industry in Australia is a really strong sector in the Great Barrier Reef region. It's very, very big and the main source of diffuse source pollution. Now what do we see here is an abatement cost function. So on the horizontal axis we have improvement in water quality, and here we have the cost associated to this water quality improvement. So what we identified that in sugarcane production we can have negative abatement costs, which means that there is benefits to be gained by the actual sugarcane industry to reduce water pollution. So they're over-applying, in this case mainly fertilizers, in their sugarcane production. So they can, up to about 250 tons of DIN per year, we can reduce in DIN export, dissolved inorganic nitrogen, and we can actually gain by doing that. Well, this is a very important message. And so we reduce pollution and we gain in the back pocket. Win-win. Really important message. Now this is when we do things smartly in the landscape. So we apply the right practices at the right place. So depending on the soil types, on the slopes of the terrain, on the precipitation in the area, etc. Now if we apply these management practices in a more simple way, just throughout the landscape the same practices, we see that these benefits are a little bit smaller. So in this case we identified one particular practice throughout the entire landscape for this particular industry, and we see that the benefits are a little bit smaller here, and when we reduce water pollution really a lot, or have to reduce water pollution really a lot, these abatement costs increase exponentially. So if we reduce water pollution by 400 tons, the extra cost would be up to $4 or $5 million per year more. So that's a lot of money. So what I'm trying to say here, so we can also go through the third best option, and then these costs will be even larger. So what I'm saying is identifying in a spatially explicit way the best practices at the right place can save us a lot of money, in particular when we need to reduce water pollution to a large extent. Okay. Second, inter-industry. There's different industries in the catchment. It's not only sugarcane, it's also grazing, it's banana production, it's forestry, etc. Now all these industries, all these sectors, they have different costs of production, they work in different environments, in different locations in the catchment. So to what extent should we reduce water pollution in each of these industries? Now this depends a little bit to what extent this depends a lot also on the benefits that we can obtain from water pollution in the downstream environment. So what we try to do here is to identify which industries can most cost effectively or at least cost contribute to water quality improvement. So in this case, what we'll see, in this case we use an optimal control approach, CROWPA it's called, and we identify these benefits, the benefits from water pollution and the benefits of water quality in the downstream environment. So in this case we have two industries, so the sugarcane production, which is the blue one, and grazing, which is the purple or pink one. So here we clearly see that in sugarcane production again, win-wins to be obtained, it's the same curve. But in grazing production, we see that there is any reduction in water pollution provoked by the grazing industry will lead immediately to a cost. So, when there's no benefits to be gained from water quality improvement, you would just only reduce water pollution in the sugarcane industry, because it's a win-win, that's what would happen. But if there is benefits to be gained from water quality improvement, so the less naive version of the world, we do recognize this, finally, fortunately, then we see that, yes, there will still be a focus clearly on sugarcane production, where we can most cost effectively, at least cost, reduce water pollution, but also in the grazing industry. Okay, so we see overall that there's large benefits to be gained. So this is important because we can identify in this the first case that in this case that there's benefits to be gained through win-wins, and the second case also because there are benefits to be gained downstream in the marine environment, tourism, fishery, all kinds of cultural activities, tourism, and you name it. So here we see that the benefits, even though that there will be costs associated to reducing water pollution by the industries, by the agricultural sector, the benefits obtained from the downstream economic activities can largely compensate the costs associated with these reductions in water pollution. Okay, third. So we can use different incentives. So we identified, yes, we can reduce water pollution and we should do so in a spatially explicit way and focus on different industries. But how can we convince farmers to change their behavior? Economic instruments is one of them. So we can apply taxes, subsidies, cap and trade systems, and all kinds of credits if you like. Now, all these industries, all these sectors, they are different and they respond differently to economic incentives. So what we want to do here is identify what would be the kind of incentives that we use and which ones are most effective. So in this case we can have a look at, for example, taxes on the delivery of DIN to the coast, or a subsidy in reducing this delivery to the coast. So if we do that, they're all the same value. So if we do that, we do get a decrease in water pollution from 640 to 370 or so. And we see that the subsidy as well as the tax, they result in exactly the same reduction in water pollution. So this is just the carrot and the stick. It's a different incentive, same outcome. The costs, however, are a little bit different. So tax reduces regional income, so from the agricultural sector, from 125 to 111 $1 million per year. Well, if we apply the subsidy, so the farming industry would not be very happy with that. But if we apply the subsidy, then the farming community will stand up and applaud, because this would lead immediately to an increase of $10 million per year in terms of agricultural income. This is the avenue that Australia has taken in most of its catchments, providing subsidies to farmers to actually adopt good practices. Nevertheless, these kind of incentives are efficient because they apply to the actual pollutant, but they are also difficult to implement because we need to identify where does the pollution come from. How can we prove that it's coming from somewhere? To what extent does pollution in the upstream or downstream environment contribute to actual pollution in the downstream environment? A much simpler incentive would be just a tax on fertilizer. Just make the price higher, you go to the register, increase the price, that's it. You can't have it more simple than that. Leads to the same reduction in water pollution, but the costs are also higher. Because it's less efficient, because you punish everyone in the same way. So also farmers that live upstream in the catchment where there's very little erosion and very little drained soils, not a lot of that the nitrogen will actually come into the aquatic system. So you're punishing everyone in the same way while they're not contributing to water pollution in the same way. So that costs money. Okay, good. Fourth. I'm running through. To what extent can we can reduce water pollution at the source, as we've seen? We can identify it across space, different management practices, and we can do that across different industries. We can also clean things up. We can also put in wetlands and magic will happen. Especially managed wetlands are quite effective in actually cleaning up water. So to what extent should we focus on abatement versus treatment? Now if we look here we have the abatement cost functions for all agricultural industries in the catchment, and here we have an abatement cost function for wetlands. So these are managed wetlands. You need to manage them in order to actually have net removal of nutrients in this, nitrogen in this case. So here what we see is that any reduction in water pollution through managed wetlands is costly. You need to establish the thing, so even if there's no pollution happening, you need to establish it. It costs money. So that's important. Well, I mean, it's clear. It costs money to establish these things, and they've got an opportunity cost, etc. Nevertheless, these wetlands also provide multiple benefits. It's not only about treatment of wetlands. No, it's also about having fish species or spawning areas or all kinds of habitats for all kinds of species that live there and that provide all kinds of services, cultural services also, that are very important, very valuable. So perhaps we should not focus only on water pollution treatment from wetlands. So this is the alternative cost functions that we propose, so that part of the wetland is actually financed through other services. So in this case, what do we see? So if we're naive and there's no benefits from water quality improvement, we see we should only abate water pollution, so reduce pollution at the source. Why there's no treatment? Because it only has a cost and there's no benefit associated to it. Naive version of the world. However, if we recognize that there's downstream benefits from water quality improvement, yes, there is space, there is economic sense in making or establishing, maintaining wetlands or managed wetlands in particular. Nevertheless, as you can see, this is the amount of water quality improvement you would go for through abatement, so reducing in the polluting sectors, and this is what you would aim for in terms of treatment. So, important lesson here, it's more efficient to reduce pollution at the source than trying to clean it up afterwards. Okay, finally, full water benefits valorization. So, what I wanted to say here during the work in Australia was a lot of focus on downstream, on the reef. But there's a little bit of a disconnect between what happens in the catchment and what happens on the reef. People that live and work on the catchment, they don't live and work on the reef. So we always clearly felt this disconnect between stakeholders on the two sides. And we kind of ignored a little bit the importance of all these water quality improvement benefits that happen in between as well. It's not just about the downstream final. It's also about what happens in the streams and rivers, what happens on the beaches, what happens on those areas where people, those stakeholders that pollute, also directly are in contact with. So what we touch the button. Not quite sure. Okay, so what we wanted to show here, and this is work we did with Nelson, that we'll talk a little bit more about all kinds of issues as well. But what we wanted to show here is that there's a strong relationship between, obviously, the ecological state of water and the chemical state of water, and that there's benefits to be gained, and that this refers to freshwater systems, that there's benefits to be gained when we improve water quality. So the water quality index is normally, so the Water Framework Directive in general, well, they work on the basis of ecological and chemical indicators, but the chemical indicators are mostly used when we use water quality models, in essence. So we made a relationship between the ecological and chemical status and related that to the benefits that we get from water quality improvement in terms of cultural benefits associated to these systems between users and non-users and users. So what we, if we have the current state of the freshwater systems, we can see that there is a willingness to pay for by non-users of 50 and 160 or so euros per year for non-users, for users. Now, if we improve water quality to the level of the Water Framework Directive, so what we agreed to aim for, then we see that there is a large increase in benefits from water quality improvement. So people are willing to pay for that. There is benefits to be gained. Well, many of these benefits are not recognized, but they should be recognized, and it will help us in, let's say, showcasing and argumenting that it's important to improve water quality because we can benefit from it. And not only the downstream environment and the reefs and the reef-associated systems, but also all these stakeholders, all the non-users and users that use these freshwater systems, for example, in the meantime. So, summing up, lots of benefits to be gained from water quality improvement through inter water quality improvement within industries, between industries, looking at smart economic incentive instruments, looking at water pollution abatement, but also treatment, and also considering in particular all these water quality improvement benefits that we can identify. Very important in this, what I really want to recognize here is that we should look at, so when we looked at the wetlands, it's not just the water pollution treatment function of a wetland that we should look at. No, we should look at all the services that a wetland provide. That's really important. So look at the multiple services from these abatement measures or treatment measures. And also recognize that improved water quality also increases the quality of our ecosystems. And so wetlands will also become more healthy, and there's all kinds of associated systems to the related to the aquatic system that benefit from the improvements in water quality that we didn't have a look at yet in this particular case. Okay, just some final notes for discussion. So yes, economic reasoning and efficiency provides, in water quality improvement and management, provides welfare gains. It's Pareto efficient, very good. But it may result in some perverse effects. So we saw, for example, that there is a focus on reducing water pollution in the sugarcane industry. So we should focus mainly on that area, on that sector. While some other sectors, they are less efficient and they are less focused on. So it leads to some social changes, for example, some social frictions, as you can see. And also what's really important here is this is a soft sustainability perspective. So we kind of say, okay, pollution is allowed and ecosystem degradation is allowed to a certain degree as long as we benefit from it. As long as there's welfare gains, we allow it. Now this is something very different from strong sustainability. And we need to recognize that this soft sustainability approach can only at best approximate strong sustainability in the most extreme case. But, and I should have put here the beginning picture again, all that economic thinking that we put into the water quality improvement plan and the reef rescue plans, they contributed to water quality improvement in the catchment, but it did not avoid the fact that we had severe reductions in reef quality over the last 2-3 years. Okay, so I wanted to stop on that point. Thanks, sir.
Does anybody want to?
questions?
I would actually wanted to say something because Anna talked about in the continuum, yeah, from freshwater to coastal waters, and you said that taking the problem at the source level, we can have many gains at the coast, for instance. So it's not thinking about the systems isolated, but as a continuum.
Crucial. Yeah.
Thank you. And now we have Dr. Paula Quinteiro, that is a postdoc researcher at the DAO and CESAM from here at the university, and she's giving a lecture on water scarcity footprint, an environmental tool to support the sustainable use and management of freshwater resources.
Okay, thank you for the introduction and good morning to all. So I am going to talk a little bit about water footprint, water scarcity footprint as an environmental tool to support the sustainable use and management of freshwater resources. In the few words, water scarcity footprint or water footprint is a methodological tool encompassed in the life cycle thinking approach that allows us to measure the impacts of water consumptions to produce different kinds of products or to apply to a service or organization, and to promote the actions, measures to improve this efficiency of water use. So this platform has as main purpose to answer to three different questions: water footprint, why, what for, and how to do it. Just to present you a simple case study to give you the idea what the type of results that we can obtain with water footprint and how to interpret them, and then a couple of take-home messages more related to the development challenges that water footprint assessment tool has, because this is an ongoing research issue that deserves and requires a deep analysis to increase the robustness of the tool and its transparency and flexibility to all kinds of products, processes, and organizations. So, water footprint, why? I don't know. If you can see this picture, we can see that only 3% of water that are available in the world is freshwater, and only 0.5% of this freshwater are available in aquifers, rainfall, natural lakes, and so on. So taking into account these figures and having in mind that we have population growth, the effects of climate change, and that people use billions of cubic meters of water every year, not only for drinking water, but also for manufacturing, tourism, cooling, heating, and so on. So should catch our attention that it's crucial to access and to see how to deal with the rivers and groundwater vulnerability and overexploitation. So therefore, understanding the impact, or what we call in life cycle assessment and water footprint, the footprint of production on the water resources, this is a vital step toward defining strategies to reduce water use and water consumption. And these results can be achieved by using the indirect and direct water use, and with this I am referring to the direct water that is used to consume a product, but also the whole of volume of water that is indirectly consumed to produce it, like for instance related to the energy vectors, energy carriers that are consumed to produce a product. And to do this, we use a life cycle approach. This means that we consider all the water consumed from the extraction of raw materials throughout production, distribution use, phase use, and final disposal, always with the purpose of to identify and prioritize investments that allow us to conduct to increase of water use efficiency and also to reduce the pollution of the water. So, life cycle assessment already covers huge range of environmental impacts, land use, eutrophication, and acidification, and with the inclusion of the water footprint that we can call is a water footprint scarcity or water footprint profile, if you are considering the scarcity and also the degradative quality of water. This gave us a more complete environmental coverage, if I can call it, of the environmental problems. The water footprint assessment method is also regulated by an ISO, related to water footprint principles, requirements and guidelines. These ISO are in line of some of the sustainable development goals, mainly related to the water scarcity and how to improve and apply measures to reduce this water scarcity and regulate water use management. Also related with the climate actions, with the purpose of including the water footprint assessments, the effects or the impacts of climate change on the water scarcity, and also related to the life below water, related more to the environmental water pollution and mainly nutrients pollution to oceans and rivers. So in water footprint we can use three different components. The green water, that is related to the precipitation that falls and then is evapotranspiration by plants and returns to the atmosphere. Blue water, and in this context blue water is related to the water, fresh water in rivers, lakes and aquifers that are consumed by the plants. It's not related to the blue water related to the oceans or marine resources. And also the component of the degradation of water, more related with the applications of pesticides, nutrients and fertilizers to soil. And when we are applying the degradative use, we are talking about the water footprint profile. So water footprint, what for? This couple of figures was the first attempt to report and to communicate to all the stakeholders the water footprint of several products, mainly agro-industrial ones. So we can see that, for instance, to have a cup of coffee, we need more than 100 of liters of water. Not only water related to direct production on plant, but also the water that is consumed during the growth of the coffee plants. For instance, to produce one pair of jeans, we need almost 80,000 of liters of water. This quantity of water is mainly related to the precipitation that we consume during the cotton production. So, okay, we have these figures, but what are the meaning of these figures? What to do with this? These are huge numbers. What tell us, for instance, not to use jeans because they consume a lot of water? No. We need a tool that allows us to evaluate these figures and to translate these figures in the environmental impacts values that allow us also to compare the environment performance of the same product but produced in different regions of the world. Because the problem of water, the water availability and demand, different change depending of the local of the world. So the benefits and the purpose of conducting the water footprint assessment. They allow us, or they can help us in assessing the magnitude of potential environmental impacts related to water use and water consumption. Identifying ways to reduce potential water-related impacts of products at various life cycle stages and of process of organization. This is a tool that is transversal to all these kinds of applications. Facilitating and promoting the water efficiency and optimization of water management, also at the three levels, product, process and organizations. And also to provide a scientific, consistent and reliable information for reporters and to communicate to all stakeholders, including the final clients, the water footprint results. So, and how to do it? From a simplistic way, I want just to give an idea how to do it. In just a few words, we can obtain our scarcity footprint of a product. For instance, by multiplying the water consumption inventory, having attention that we need to account all the direct and indirect consumption of water, and then to multiply by what we call as water scarcity factors. These factors that can be calculated for blue water and green water give you an idea of the locations that already experience high levels of green and blue water scarcity footprints, and allow us also to compare a product, the same product produced here in India, China, Australia, and so on, and to try to identify steps or process where we can actually work and reduce the water scarcity. For instance, just to have an idea, these blue water acquisition factors take into account all the quantities of water that are needed to human consumption. They are based on statistical data for 2010, and also take into account the environmental requirements to maintain the freshwater ecosystems. In the case of green water, we need to take into account the land use changes. This means that, for instance, we have a land use production, but there are also potential native vegetation that would replace these land use production systems. So this needs to account this situation. Is not a gross green water, it's not a total of water that the plant is consuming, but is a net one because it's also related to the natural potential vegetation. This last figure is just to show that, for instance, right now, to calculate blue water scarcity footprint, we have a lot of methods. Each of the methods give us different characterization factors. All these methods can be applied depending on our goal, of course, and take into account the limitations of each one of them. Briefly, a case study. The goal of this case study was to assess the water scarcity footprint, just related to green and blue water, for a Portuguese wine, Vinho Verde. Our functional unit that provides us a reference to what we can translate our inputs and outputs result. This means that all the data are related to one bottle of Vinho Verde with 0.75 liters of wine. From a life cycle assessment, we need to define the system boundary. This means to define all the process stages, raw materials, intermediate products, energies, and so on, that are related to the production of this wine. This is what we call a cradle-to-gate approach, because it starts in the vine with viticulture operations and ends of the gate of the factory, just to where the bottle of the wine is prepared to distribute. Here we also divide it in two different stages, the viticulture stages and the production plant stages, and also we did the second differentiation between foreground systems, in which we collected primary data, mainly from the company, and then background data that many of the times we use databases. So, having the inventory, having the characterization factors specially differentiated for this area, we can obtain the results. These results can be communicated as total volumes. In this case, they are related to total impacts of water scarcity usage, but also to allow us to identify what is the stage that most contributes to this total value, and therefore identify where is the place where the stakeholder needs to act. In a little more detail, this figure shows that within each stage we have different processes that contribute in different percentages to the total water scarcity footprint. And we also can see that depending on the method used, this figure shows only 4 of methods that are right now available, we have different hotspots. For instance, for the first method, we can see that energy carriers are very high contribution. But for instance, in the last methods, we can see that more than 95% of water footprint that has been accessed is related to the viticulture, mainly related to the green water, but this is too much information for right now. Just to have an idea what are the results and how we can use it to conduct or to support decision making and improvement measures. So just to finish, it's true that we can use all these methods, these and more other than that being developed in the meantime. There are a couple of methods. But right now we need to go forward and we need to try or to work more on developing green water scarcity, but that can combine the environment mechanisms related to green water and blue water, because as we know, there are a relation between the water precipitation that infiltrates in the soil and gives orange to the blue water. We actually, our group is already working on this, but a lot of work is still needed to do, including the climate change effects on the characterization factors, and establish and go deeper to a deeper spatial and temporal variation in the characterization factors, because related even to the green water, the spatial variation is very important, but inter and intratemporal of the precipitation and the growing season of the cultures are issues that contribute significantly for the different water scarcity footprints. These were examples just related to the scarcity. We also work on the water footprint that, as I said, includes the water pollution to aquatic, freshwater aquatic reserves and to marine reserves. And this is all. I don't know if you want to ask something. Thank you for all your attention.
Does anybody have a question? I don't drink wine, but I drink coffee. And I was amazed with how many liters you take just to have one cup of coffee.
Were the first figures and results that were translated to the community.
Okay. So now we are having a coffee break. Okay. So if you want to go, the ones that are via YouTube, give us 15 minutes. Can we start? Sorry. And now we have with us Dr. Rocha. He's a junior researcher at the Department of Biology in CESAM, and he will give us a lecture about water as a source of food equality and sustainable development.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Rocha, and I will present an overview on the projects we are developing, projects involving water, and this is the work of a lot of people. I'm just here to presenting, but I'm not the only one involved on the project, of course. Okay. So, in 2015, countries adopted a set of goals to end poverty, protect the planet, and ensure a sustainable development. Most of these goals focus on environment, people, and sustainability. I will highlight the goal 14, live below water, or if you want, live with water. And as you know, nowadays we are facing a lot of problems of pollution, environmental and climate change, and anthropogenic pressures that goes from the plastics in the water to the overexploitation of most of marine and freshwater species. And the countries of United Nations adopted these goals to achieve a sustainable management and protection of marine ecosystems, and to regulate the harvesting and the overfishing practices, the illegal fishing practices, and also increase the economic benefits and the development of countries less developed, ensuring also the increase of scientific knowledge, development, research, and technology transfer in developing countries. So, in this scope, we still to have a big question and a big issue. Can we really feed the world? Because the population is increasing and the feeding demand is increasing as well, and we need to feed people. So we need to find a solution that can contribute to feed people in a sustainable way without compromising the environment. And the community-based aquaculture can be the path for this sustainable development. The aquaculture can ensure the access by all the people to safe food, can contribute also to sustainable alternatives for overfishing and overexploitation of aquatic resources, and also can be an inclusive way and sustainable way to create decent job, entrepreneurship and innovation, and focusing on gender equality and equality of opportunities for all. In the community-based projects we develop in African countries, in Portuguese African countries, we try to set some methodologies based on basic science to develop applied research to culture the species we want to culture. And then we need to simplify this methodology in a way that it can be reproduced by the people. So we need to have these 3 steps: the basic research, methodology development, and technology transference. We are with projects in Mozambique, Angola, and São Tomé and Príncipe. But today I will speak about Mozambique projects because are in a more developed phase. And one of the projects I will present was developed inside a big project led by the Zoological Society of London, the Our Sea Our Life project, that aimed to involve communities, coastal communities, in agriculture and in fisheries management and in marine areas, protected marine areas in the intertidal. And the aquaculture get in this project as a compensation form to the people, especially to the women that use mosquito net fishing practices that catch all the fish, all the juveniles, and was a way to allow these people to have some capacity to produce protein and to have some income. These villages culturally are have some specificities that we need to respect, and I always there was an history that happens with us when we arrived to this village of Kiwia in the north of Mozambique, really close to the border with Tanzania. We planned all the projects to culture the mangrove oyster Socostraea cuculata because we need to culture that species in the intertidal to allow women to go during low tide to do all the procedures of maintenance and control the production. And we arrived and we had a meeting with the community leader, the older man, and also the spiritual leader, and we explained everything we aimed to do with translators because in spite of being a Portuguese-speaking country, in these villages they don't speak Portuguese, they have local languages. And they explained us that they don't like this oyster and that they will not eat this oyster, so we need to change the species. And without internet, without anything, was a bit difficult in 48 hours to change all the scope of the project. So we had a problem. And we asked why, and they said, why? Because we don't eat, because this oyster only can be eaten by a woman, because every man that eats this oyster will become a woman. I was a bit desperate. No, it's not true. I will eat one. Look, everything is good with me. And they told, no, wait, it's not now. It's in a few months. So 2 years ago, until now, is everything okay with me? But these aspects must to be taken in consideration because we cannot arrive and try to impose our opinion or our culture. We need to integrate these cultural aspects, and we achieve a very important and a very interesting achievement. We worked with teams in gender equality, and when we finished this pilot project, we had teams with the same number of men and women working together, something that was not common at all in these communities. So the water came here as a connection and as a way to develop and to approach men and women and try to overlap these cultural issues. So back to the project, we need to choose species with low feeding requirements. So the first species we try to culture are the bivalves because they are filter feeders and don't need feed supply. The environmental impact of this culture is also lowered, and we are not dependent of feed factories, transport, logistics, because everything is very far away from these villages. We set up the tables with local materials. We used, in the first approach, plastic mesh bags to culture the oysters. And now the objective is to replace these plastic materials by vegetal fibers they have in the local, not endangered species, but available fibers as sisal and other resistant fibers. We also try to involve the community and local scientists to have the capability, the formation and the transfer of technology. We are all nowadays, this project we finished last year, as I said. Now we are going to the step 2 and replicate these methodologies in a village more to the south, because unfortunately this region had a lot of insurance and attacks, terrorism in the last year. So we need to stop the project here and we will move to the south, hoping that the situation went calm and we can back to these north villages and develop the aquaculture in the communities. We start also in the end of the last year another project in Mozambique, the project Nutrimo, that aimed to develop handmade diets for tilapia nutrition in community-based aquaculture. We have Henriques Bustani, a Mozambican student involved in this project. He is doing his PhD on this project. And basically we aim to take the agricultural wastes to produce feed, to feed tilapia. We have some steps that we start now to collect the ingredients, and we will characterize the raw ingredients here in Aveiro. We will also perform some experiments with tilapia to test these formulations. Then we choose the better formula to juveniles and to adults, and we go to Mozambique to implement community-based aquaculture and to explain people how to produce these handmade diets. And our goal is to replace at least 50% of the premium ingredients, vegetable ingredients, by waste from agriculture. And to finish, we also are working with corals, and we also have a Mozambican student finishing his master with corals. The coral crisis is a real problem, and we are mainly focusing here in Aveiro in the trophic balance, autotrophy, heterotrophy of tropical corals. aiming the development of methodologies to produce and to select by asexual reproduction harder corals more resistant to temperature increase. And the last step of this project is to implement artificial reefs in Mozambique because these reefs are endangered, and also in the north substantial parts of the coral reef are being destroyed because of gas and oil exploitation. So, and that's it. Thank you for your attention. If you have any question or any curiosity about our projects, you have the email, the CESAM website, and I hope in the next year present some results of projects in Angola and São Tomé and Príncipe that are now starting. Thank you.
So this is the way they, in Australia, try to, let's say, deal with this huge reef decline, is actually creating artificial reefs and trying to identify the corals that are most resilient to these bleaching kind of events. So yeah, what they try to do is kind of replicate from the healthy parts of the reef and try to plant it over to the parts that have deceased. So yeah, it's a little bit of an artificial trick to keep the system alive. But what's your opinion about that way of trying to save the reef?
Well, good question. I don't believe in restocking because several projects failed, and probably doesn't make sense to plant coral fragments in reefs that are with problems and where the corals are dying. But I think artificial reefs in areas with good water conditions, where probably they don't have reefs because any substrate was present in 1,000 years ago and corals didn't settle, probably can be a path. The curiosity about these reefs of Mozambique is that we can find, for example, Acropora at 29 degrees, 30 degrees, not bleaching. Probably is related with the dinoflagellate clade or species, or probably is resulted from thousands of years of acclimatization or adaptation. I don't know. But the main objective here is to try to compensate the reef destruction because of economical pressures and needs with the implementation of artificial reefs in areas where the water have good conditions, but the sediment is just sand and any coral are present. Additionally, this can be good in mid-long term to tourism, I believe, and use these artificial reefs as diving or snorkeling points instead of causing pressure in the natural reefs. And in this way to involve also the communities to have some return, and I hope in 10 or 15 years that they can have this village tourism with snorkeling and diving, and the family adopting a coral colony and go there each 2 years to see if the colony is growing.
Anybody? No? So we will pass to the next lecture. Dr. Nelson Abrantes is a researcher at DAO and CESAM, and he will talk about the impacts of post-fire contamination on water quality, what we know.
Okay, thank you for the invitation, and it's a pleasure to share with you what we exactly know about the impacts of post-fire contamination on water quality. I'm a member of Earth Surface Processes team, and our main focus are wildfires, but since we are a multidisciplinary team, we are touching different thematics around wildfire. We have been coordinating and collaborating in different research projects, national and international, related with wildfires, and presently we are coordinating 6 national projects and collaborating in 2 international. So, according to the 6 sustainable goals defined by the United Nations, besides water quantity, is also important to consider water quality, and it is urgent to incorporate good water quality in the concept of water security. And to assure a good water quality, we need to characterize the sources of pollution. And one of the main challenging sources are the diffuse sources. Why? They are difficult to monitor, to control, and regulate. And when we think about diffuse sources, we easily think in agriculture, in urban and industrial runoff, and we often forget the impacts of wildfires. So let's take a look on what's happened with wildfires. So on the left side, we have the pre-fire, on the right side is the post-fire, and what we can see is that with the wildfire, vegetation and litter are transformed in ashes, and also the soil by the wildfire change some properties, namely their structure. So with the rain events, the ashes and the topsoil, they can be easily eroded and transported by runoff to the surface water, or they even can reach the groundwater by leaching processes. So let's take a close look into the ashes composition. Ashes, they can present inorganic components and also organic. In terms of the measure inorganic compounds, we can find manganese, silicon, potassium, and calcium. In a lower extent, we can also find sodium, phosphorus, and sulfur, and we can find also trace metals. Regarding the organic compounds, we can find polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons, but we can also find in a lower extent dioxins and furans. So, okay, some results that we obtain in a study that we conduct, and if we compare the ashes in the black layer, we can easily see that in this case some heavy metals, ashes are much more rich in heavy metals than the soil. And if we compare the burned with unburned, we can see that the ashes, they contribute to the increase of heavy metals compared to the unburned soil, namely in terms of manganese and lead. And the same for PAHs. If we compare the ashes, the underlying soil with the unburned area, we can see that the highest concentrations we found in ashes, and like metals, the ashes also contribute to the incorporation of PAHs to the underlying soil. So, what are the real impacts of wildfires on water quality? In fact, according to the literature and also according to our results, the wildfires can impact the physical, chemical, and biological properties, and the magnitudes of these impacts are really dependent on the size, on the intensity and severity of fire, but also on the watershed morphology. So, what's happened? Well, with the input of sediments, the turbidity increase, and if turbidity increase, it influences negatively the rate of photosynthesis. Also, if the river bank plants disappear by burning, there is an increase in temperature that in turn increases the biological activity that requests high demand of dissolved oxygen. Also, the increase of temperature can accelerate the eutrophication process. So, if the dissolved oxygen decreases, it can impair the survival and sustainability of the aquatic biota. What we also found is that the increase of nutrients, namely nitrogen, phosphorus, and carbon, can increase manifolds, and again, they can promote the eutrophication. And also, the input of toxic substances, namely metals and PAHs, they can be potentially toxic to the aquatic biota. According to the literature, namely studies that were carried out in USA and Australia, they found impacts of wildfires on the growth and survival of macrophytes, aquatic invertebrates and fish, and also the literature reports shifts in the benthic algae and also in the macroinvertebrates community due to the wildfire. However, we know that wildfire affects water quality, but the impacts of the post-fire contamination have been largely ignored by the scientific community. And Fire Talks, a project that we coordinate, provide the first evidences that post-fire contamination can be potentially toxic to the aquatic organisms. So, and why? Metals and PAHs that are attached to the ashes, they are considered priority pollutants because they are toxic, mutagenic, carcinogenic. They can bioaccumulate through the trophic chain and they can be persistent over time. So they comprise risks to the ecosystems and also to the human health. And under the scope of the Fire Talks, we ran several experiments. Since this was a topic completely ignored, we start with some standards assays, and we found that, namely for producers, we found a significant inhibition when we expose macrophyta and also microalgae to the runoff that we collect in a burnt area. Also, when we exposed these producers to ash extract, because sometimes it's quite difficult to collect the runoff, so we use ash extract as a proxy of the runoff, and we also found a significant inhibition for both species. We also did some experiments using a fish, in this case Gambusia, and we found some oxidative stress response and also cellular damage when we expose the fish to the runoff and also to stream water collected in a burnt area. And also we conduct some experiments using an invertebrate, and we found some response in terms of their physiology and feeding behavior, with, of course, impacts on the key ecological processes in streams. To increase the environmental relevance of our studies, we also conduct some in situ experiments. So in this case, we took the species to the fields in a burnt area and we exposed them for a certain time. And for the generality of the species, that were quite a lot, 7 species, we found a significant inhibition. This was, of course, interesting because on the field we have fluctuations and is much more relevant because we have more than one precipitation event, and this kind of response compared to the lab give us a much more idea of what is going on. Okay? However, despite our first efforts to generate new knowledge, namely to understand the impacts of post-fire contamination on aquatic biota, there is a fundamental understanding how wildfires can induce changes on aquatic systems. So we are now coordinating a project named Aquafire, and this project show a multi-evidence approach that considers different lines of evidence, namely the chemical, ecological, and ecotoxicological. So we aim to estimate the risks, and the risks not only for the ecosystem but also for the human health, namely due to the water consumption and also the potential consumption of contaminated fish. So we hope that with this project we can answer important questions as the potential for bioaccumulation of these compounds through the trophic chain, and also is there any risk for the human health? Okay, as concluding remarks, let me emphasize that the importance of wildfires as an important source of diffuse pollution to the aquatic systems. Also that wildfire can significantly threat the water quality, with implications for aquatic ecosystems and even for the public health, and considering the limitations of current knowledge and knowing that post-fire management must be based on scientific community, it's really imperative to generate new knowledge and understand the off-side effects of wildfires on water quality. Okay, thanks for your attention.
Questions? No? Thank you, Nelson. So now we have Dr. Maria Pavlaki. She is a junior researcher at DBU in CESAM, and she's going to talk about mixture toxicity predictions to address groundwater contamination. Okay. Can't see very well. Okay. No, I'll stay here. I'll stay from this side. Well, thank you for this initiative. It's a very nice idea. It was a very nice idea of you to for this symposium for today. My presentation today is about predictions, mixture toxicity predictions in order to address groundwater contamination. So we heard a lot of presentations today talking about coastal and freshwater environments, but today I'm going to talk about groundwater environment. In the previous, on the presentation of Dr. Paula, Quinteiro, if I'm correct, you did talk about groundwater a bit, referring to the freshwater. That was a very nice introduction to my presentation. How do I move from here? Okay, so in case you didn't know, a lot of the fresh water that we are consuming every day comes from groundwater, from the groundwater supply. So not just here in Portugal, but worldwide. And it's considered to be a strategic resource for drinking water supply and also for agricultural uses. And at the same time, it is very important for the ecosystem quality, energy, and food security. Let's not forget that groundwater at this moment, it supplies approximately 2 billion people with drinking water,
and it's being used for irrigation purposes and in the industry. This is just for you to have an idea of how much groundwater we're using here in Portugal. So from the total water that we're consuming, 44% comes from groundwater, while for agricultural purposes, 80% of that water comes from groundwater. We have a lot of aquifers here, in case you haven't seen. So as in the morning, as Dr. Paula Quinteiro presented, approximately 3% of world's water supply is fresh water. So from that 3%, only 30% is groundwater. The rest is either in the form of glaciers, snow, or ice, and then less than 1% is in the forms of, you can find in lakes, rivers, and etc. So this groundwater sometimes is not easily accessible. So why does that happen? Okay, so you can see in this image, okay, these are the aquifers that we have in the world. So in purple, these are the really deep aquifers that usually they don't have an easy access. The green ones are the aquifers that they are considered complex. So what does it mean by complex? Is that they might or might not be accessible, but at the same time, the fresh water is either contaminated, not with anthropogenic contaminants, but mainly salt water. And then you have the parts that they are the yellow, that these are aquifers that they are easily accessible, because they have the water level is really shallow, is really low. But at the same time, even though they're easily accessible, due to overexploitation, you have, you cannot use it anymore. So the aquifers, they are defined into two types mainly. So you have the confined aquifer and the unconfined aquifer. The confined aquifer is really deep, is a very deep aquifer, and it's called confined because of the pressure. So when you drill a hole, the water, you will not need a pump, so the water will just come springing out. So these are what they form, these type of aquifers form the natural springs. And then you have the unconfined aquifer, which, when you drill a hole, you will need pumps to take out the water. So this is what we call, these are the pumping wells, and these are usually the ones that they're used for drinking water, for example. So, as I said, we do have, that 30% is quite an amount, as you can see from the volume here, but at the same time, besides of whether it's being accessible or not, or whether it's being easy, whether it's being financially acceptable, let's just say, to use techniques to withdraw that water, we have also another factor, that is the quality of the groundwater. And when I talk about the quality, I'm always referring, in my case at least, I'm always referring to the major sources of groundwater contamination. The previous presentation, Dr. Nelson Abrantes talked about contamination of the water, and one of the points that he mentioned was also the leachates. So this is one way of contaminating groundwater. So you can have, besides the urban runoffs or the industrial runoffs, you have also soil from agricultural runoffs, and the most important one in our case at least, which is something that we are studying on, is the leachates. So this work that I'm presenting is included in the project We Need. It's an international project where the PI, the principal researcher, is Professor Susana Loureiro. So the main goal of this project is to develop new management strategies to assist in the sustainable use of two key components of the groundwater resource. So that of two groundwater resources. So it's the pumping wells, which are the ones that I referred at the beginning, that is to use for drinking purposes, and the natural springs. So that usually these type of groundwater resources are used for crop irrigation and as well recreational use. So this project is using two points in Italy, two areas, the Cremona area and the Bologna area, which both of these areas, they have aquifers. The Cremona aquifer is an unconfined aquifer, while the Cremona aquifer, yes, is an unconfined aquifer, while the Bologna aquifer is a confined one. The Cremona, the water from the groundwater from Cremona is being used for mainly agricultural usage, and the Bologna aquifer is being used for drinking purposes. So our objective, our work package that we're included in from the University of Aveiro is work package 4, which is focused on the ecotoxicity of the water. So our main objective is to try and assess the effects that emergent contaminants may have to the environment and provide risk assessment of any implications related to the potential hazards of groundwater pollution to these type of ecosystems. And in order to do that, we are going to assess the toxicity of groundwater samples and eventually infer to any potential increases. In this case, we are more interested in the existence of a synergism effect due to multiple chemical exposure. And to do that, in order to achieve our objective, we're going to use 2 freshwater organisms. The one is Daphnia magna, that is a freshwater model crustacean, and the other one is Dania aurerio, which is a freshwater fish. And they're both considered model organisms because they have very well established international guidelines. We're going to assess several endpoints such as survival, reproduction, feeding, among others. Okay, as you can understand, it's not feasible to bring the waters from Italy here. So one of our partners in the project, that is the Weizmann Institute of Science from Israel, what they did is that they did the chemical analysis of the 2 points in Italy, the Cremona and the Bologna, and they sent us, they recreated, they made a recipe of each water and then send us that composition so that then we can create synthetic groundwater that it can mimic the real waters. So what they found was that, okay, you can see the composition, but then they also found these 4 anthropogenic contaminants. They're really low concentrations, but the first step that we decided to do was to divide the waters. So we would consider these ones as partial waters, and then we would take these contaminants and test them individually. So we started by creating what we call partial Cremona and Bologna waters, that these are with just this composition, and then test these contaminants individually. So what we found, so these are the results. These are for the Daphnia magna, and this is for the Dania aurerio. So, and what we saw was that there was a tendency for the Daphnia. We were able to see that the Cremona waters, they seem to be mainly more toxic for the Daphnia magna, while for the Dania aurerio was the Bologna that showed higher toxicity. This is just an example of what one of the compounds caused to the zebrafish. So you can see thelma formations, you can see cardiac edemas, but then at the same time we're talking about really high concentrations that when you, if you see here, for example, for the NAF, is 25 to 75 micrograms per liter, while these effects, they started from milligrams and up. So after doing that step, we wanted to see what the full water, so the total composition, was doing to the organisms. And our results show that they didn't affect survival of the Daphnia magna, and they didn't affect the reproduction either. You could see some effects, but as long as the requirements, each standard has certain requirements that they have to be fulfilled in order to consider the water appropriate to use for both for the fish and the Daphnia and the crustacean. So as long as these requirements are fulfilled, the waters can be used for further testing. So this is what we see from both of the organisms. So these components, they did nothing, neither to the survival nor to the reproduction. They didn't cause any malformations. They didn't affect the hatching rate of the fish. So we decided to move on to the next step, that it was to test emergent and non-contaminants using the total composition of the water to each of the organisms. So some of them that you're seeing here, we chose acetaminophen, triclosan, and 2 PFAS products, the PFOA and the PFOS. The PFOA and the PFOS are considered emerging contaminants. They belong to the group of the PFAS chemicals, which at this moment in Europe, it's a great fuss about it because apparently every water body is contaminated with these compounds. So we chose this, and the first step was the individual assessment. So this is just an example of, this is survival data in each of the water. And what we're seeing here is, again, the Cremona waters. They seem to be more toxic to the Daphnia. While what we see here from the zebrafish, the Bologna appears to be the most toxic to the fish. So there is a tendency there. Once again, these results, we're talking about really high concentrations. These are not concentrations that are usually found in the environment. So for acetaminophen, for example, we start seeing an effect at a concentration of 300 milligrams per liter and up. As you can see here, it started having malformations. It had malformations also in lower levels, in lower concentrations, but these ones were prettier, so I chose those ones because, you know. So you can see that it's not prettier, they're just more evident. My bad. So you can see here acetaminophen causes pigmentation loss, so the fish end up being transparent compared to your normal controls. Okay, causes some spinal curvature, cardiac edemas, tail malformations, but again, these are concentrations that they are not found in the environment. These are not environmental relevant concentrations. So we moved on to the next step. That don't forget that we're talking about mixture toxicity prediction. So our next step was binary mixtures. So we're using a component-based approach. Okay, so and our reference model is always the concentration addition model, mainly because it's a widely accepted model by risk assessors, and it's a conservative model, and also it assumes no interaction between the chemicals. The tool that we're using is the Mixtox tool. I don't know if everybody knows it. It's a nested framework that it starts with a reference model, whether this is, in our case, is concentration addition, and by adding extra parameters, you can eventually assess any deviations from that model, such as synergistic effects or antagonistic effects, any type of, or dose level or dose ratio. And again, this is just an example from the work that we've been doing. This is a binary mixture between acetaminophen and PFOA in the Daphnia magna, in the freshwater crustacean. So what you see here is that, okay, so when we do the model, when we run our model, we don't see any difference. We see we actually see synergistic antagonistic pattern. So by adding more parameters to our model, we end up having a dose level response. So as you can see here, this is an antagonistic pattern. So what it says, this model, the dose level deviation, what it tells us is that you mainly have an antagonistic effect, but at concentrations higher than the EC50 of the mixture, you might end up having a synergistic effect. Here you can't see it because usually because in our case the Daphnias died. So this is what a synergistic effect is actually. And it's funny because this is something that we also saw when the same mixture was tested in the zebrafish. In this case, the antagonistic effect was more obvious. So by adding, so we started with our reference model, which is the concentration addition model, and by adding one parameter, it gave a significance of synergism antagonism, and then you have one parameter here that it tells you whether it's an antagonistic or a synergistic pattern. And in this case, is again an antagonistic pattern. And when we also checked for dose ratio and dose level, but it didn't give us significance. So this is the model that best fitted our data. After the binary mixtures, we move on to the ternary mixtures. So what the ternary, in this case, the example that we're having here, is a mixture of acetaminophen, teclosan, and PFOA. This is in the Daphnia magna, and what we did here is we used a fixed ratio design based on a toxic unique approach. So as you can see here, for each concentration, the toxic unique was the same. Okay, so this is it's called an ectoxic approach, we only modeled our data using the reference model. This is the concentration addition model, which is, as I mentioned before, is the model that most risk assessors prefer to use. The funny part is that what we saw was, well, first the Bologna showed higher toxicity when compared to the Cremona in the ternary, in the Daphnia magna, which is very interesting because I don't know if you remembered what I said before. The Cremona is the one that showed higher individually. The Cremona is the one that showed higher toxicity in this species. So the Bologna was the most toxic compared to the Cremona. But then when we modeled using our reference model, our predicted data showed higher toxicity, which it makes sense because the concentration addition model is a conservative model. So it just shows that how protective it can be when you use it to compare or to model and predict effects of chemicals in the field. Lastly, what we did was to try to do a risk characterization. So what we used were predicted environmental values. So we checked the literature and we found measured concentrations of each of the chemical in the environment for each of the organism. Measured concentrations in the environment, in groundwater always. We weren't interested in any other types of water. So from literature, and then according to the results that we got from our tests, we calculated a risk quotient based on the predicted measured concentration and the no effect concentration that we got from the measured concentration from the environment and the no effect concentration that we got from our test. And what we saw is that, as you can see here, these values are really high. At least for the ASTM, we only used the LC50, but for the other two waters, we used both of the organisms to predict or to assess the risk, the eventual risk that they might have when all these four are found in the environment and these two organisms are present. And lastly, I'm going to close this presentation just by showing you the structure of the we need and what we're trying to do. So mainly at the end of the project, what we're trying to do is we're trying to build a groundwater risk assessment model, and that we, from our side, we're going to feed it with our ecotoxicological data, and according to the other partners that they're going to use probabilistic flow and transportation models. Don't ask me very much what it is. So we're imagine that we're going to use all this data in order to create a risk assessment model that then eventually is going to help in the future risk assessors, and it can be used to field studies in order to take a decision under risk. So thank you so much for your attention, and this is the team behind the We Need, where all this work was done. Thank you.
Does anybody has questions? So this was the first presentation talking about real contamination in groundwater. Yeah. So at this point we were always talking about surface, more or less. So we will pass to our last presentation, last but not least. Dr. João Rito, he's a founding partner at SEAentia. I'm saying it right. It's a startup industry, and he's talking about sustainability and responsible utilization of water in aquaculture production.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for the kind invitation, for allowing me to talk here about a little bit about our project. The idea here is to talk about sustainable aquaculture and how can aquaculture actually utilize water efficiently and in a responsible way. I'm going to start by mentioning exactly what is aquaculture and how can aquaculture actually not harm the environment and be actually the opposite. So aquaculture by definition is the farming organisms in the aquatic environment, as most of you should know already, and it can happen in the marine water or in fresh water. These organisms can be fish, crustaceans, mollusks, bivalves, algae, and even more than this. So aquaculture has this ability of being able to feed the world while protecting the planet, as opposite as to a lot of thoughts about aquaculture right now. For example, world population is estimated to grow until 9.7 billion of people by 2050. And so we really need to improve how aquaculture and know how aquaculture can help to supply this extra demand for food. Every coastal country has the potential to farm its oceans. And I can even go further than this, saying that there are kinds of aquaculture systems, some types of aquaculture that actually can be done virtually in any place in the world, not only in coastal countries. Marine aquaculture, specifically marine aquaculture, requires a small land area and minimal fresh water, which is actually the one that we really want to save and really want to avoid wasting. Besides, aquaculture uses resources and space very efficiently. As an example, I can mention the fact that 1 hectare can be used to produce 0.12 tons of meat when we're talking about cattle. But if we're talking about aquaculture, we can use the same area, which is as small as 1 hectare, to produce more than 1,000 tons of fish per year. Aquaculture is the most efficient way of producing food nowadays. As an example, I can show you this image, this scheme that shows that to produce cattle, 1 pound of cattle, I can talk in kilos, is basically the same. To produce 1 kilo of cattle, you will waste 6.8 kilos of feed. For pigs it's 2.9, for chicken is 1.7, but we're talking about averages obviously. But when we're talking about fish, we're talking about 1.1 kilo of feed to grow 1 kilo of biomass, of body mass. This is really, really efficient. It can even go below 1. That depends on the species, depends on the types of system, depends on the feed formulation, depends on a lot of things. But it's really the most efficient way of producing food. This is where actually fish devote more energy towards growth and need less food per unit of production. And what causes this is actually the fact that they are less affected by gravity. So they actually channel this energy towards its growth. So aquaculture with a good spatial planning also avoids harming critical habitats like mangroves, corals and seagrasses. Obviously, I am talking always about good practices aquaculture that actually is a responsible one, because obviously we can have other parts in the world where you can find bad practices with aquaculture that can really harm the environment a lot. But aquaculture with good practices can relieve pressure on wild fish stocks, as you also might know. Overfishing has reduced stocks in about 50% since 1970, which is a lot. And aquaculture can help save this pressure over the fishing stocks. It also can contribute to ecosystem health by using excess nutrients. This is called an integrated multi-trophic aquaculture. I don't know if you've heard about it. I will talk a little bit more on this later on. And aquaculture, when done right, can contribute to environmental health by sequestering nutrients and cleaning up the water. So waste is actually converted into fertilizer and food for algae and seaweed, mollusks, worms, crabs, and other fish, as an example. This is exactly what is an integrated multi-trophic aquaculture. Aquaculture can also shorten the supply chains and grow food locally, due to the fact that I already mentioned that it can actually be implemented in any place. So you can actually produce fish where the people are. So right next to the big cities where the big markets are, instead of growing in a very remote place and then traveling around the world. For example, there is a rising demand for fish and seafood products. In 2012, it was about 156 million tons, and it's estimated to be about 261 million tons by 2030. So, taking into account that we really need to produce much more, we can actually reduce the carbon footprint by utilizing, by applying aquaculture in its good practices. And also, aquaculture has zero bycatch in opposition to fisheries. No animals are unintentionally harmed by fishing lines and nets. So aquaculture, when we're talking about responsible aquaculture and good practices aquaculture, it has a responsible water utilization by using very low fresh water per biomass produced. And this is a table showing how much water, fresh water, is used to produce 1 kilo of fish, chicken, pigs, and cattle. And you can see that it's really a huge difference. But again, I'm talking about marine aquaculture here, not talking about freshwater aquaculture. Freshwater aquaculture can also be implemented and be with good practices. But okay, the amount of freshwater used is much more than this. So right now, I want to start talking a little bit on our company, SEAentia. I will pitch you our idea, our business idea, as we usually do to other kind of audience, investors, and so on. I will avoid some numbers, but if in the end, if you want to ask me, I'll be very happy to talk about that. So firstly, SEAentia, this name comes from C plus the name SEAentia, which is science in Latin, and we fused both to produce this name, SEAentia. The problem is that society needs to ask this question: are we really able to sustainably feed the growing world population and achieve the excellence demanded by consumers in several parameters like biosecurity, and this is really, really important, biosecurity, diversification, transparency, and sustainability? Well, according to the FAO, by 2030, fish production needs to be increased in about 110 million tons of fish, which has a value of more or less 1.1 trillion euros. SEAentia has this idea of producing meager. Meager is corvina in Portuguese. I don't know if you know it. So this fish is a high quality fish with an excellent taste, a very good nutritious profile. It has a fast growth, a low FCR. The FCR is the feed conversion ratio, so the amount of food that we give to the fish, and it has a good public acceptance. So our company wants to be the first one to produce meager in a recirculating aquaculture system called RAS, which is a kind of system that allows us to promote animal welfare and avoid diseases and parasites without utilizing any antibiotics or other chemicals, so without polluting the water. With these kind of systems, we can produce 1,000 tons of meager per year in this specifically designed system for our company. As a business model, we're talking about growing meager in our own hatchery, in our own farm, until 2.5 kilos. Then this fish will be processed and transformed into these packages that can be several different products like fillets, slices, fish burgers, fish sausages, everything. And these packages are uniquely identified with our own brand, and are fully traceable from hatch until the plate of the consumer. This model has a production cost of about €4.50 per kilo, but the market prices nowadays of this specific fish ranges from 7 to 10 euros per kilo. So we obviously want to be sustainable, and by betting in sustainability, we're talking about having a circular economy philosophy. We want to use the sludge as fertilizer and for biogas production, for example. We want to use the effluent nutrients to produce lower trophic level organisms. Like I was saying before, this is the so-called integrated multi-trophic aquaculture, where we can use the excess nutrients that we have in our own water. We're talking about recirculating water, so we maintain the water always in the system. And these nutrients that we pay them, they came in the feed. We actually, instead of throwing them away and harming the environment, we actually can channel it to grow other low trophic organisms like filter feeders and algae, for example. We also want to use the processing leftovers of the processing of the fish to produce fish oil and fish meal. We're not going to do it ourselves, but we can sell these leftovers to factories of fish meal and fish oil. Also, to keep talking about sustainability, we're talking about a highly energetically demanding system. It really needs a lot of energy, these recirculation systems. So we want to produce our own energy by having photovoltaic panels in our rooftop. So the building is has more or less an area of 13,000 square meters, so a little bit more than 1 hectare. It's a big building, but very small for the amount of production that we can do in 1 year. Covering the rooftop of this building with these photovoltaic panels, we will actually produce an excess of energy. We will produce more than what we need. So with this, we actually can have the payback of only this investment alone in about 5.5 years. We obviously have our own competitors, which are fisheries, which supply wild meager, and also offshore farmers, which supply farmed meager. But our competitive advantages over these competitors is going to be biosecurity, traceability, quality, and environmental protection, all together in the production of these, what we call a premium meager. The customers are going to be supermarkets, restaurants, and seafood retailers along the Iberian Peninsula. So the Iberian Peninsula has an annual market of higher than 5,000 million euros per year. And we're talking about the Iberian Peninsula because it's also regarding sustainability. We want to commercialize it locally. So we're talking about commercializing it in Portugal and Spain. Iberian Peninsula, we will produce it here and sell it here, instead of traveling around the world before actually being consumed. And we will apply several different marketing strategies to actually attract the consumers into our product. The roadmap for our next 5 years, they started last year. It's starting the proof of concept in 2018. Then in 2020, we want to start the commercial facilities construction. In 2020 also finish the proof of concept. 2021 we want to have our first stocking, and in 2022 we want to have our first harvesting and then reaching our clients. Now talking about investment, which is the hard part, we want to bet in March 2020 and in Fundo Azul to fund our proof of concept with about 565,000 euros. And we're happy to say that March 2020 was already approved, but still the feasibility of this proof of concept is still dependent on the Fundo Azul approval that we don't know yet. With this proof of concept, we want to attract new investors to invest in our grow-out commercial facility and then start commercializing the fish. So each one of these commercial units, and this is really the investment part, this is really for what the investors want to know about. After the third year, we will reach an EBITDA of about 73%, EBIT of about 59%, and we will have a net result of 49%. So this means that we'll have a payback in 6 years. The team is comprised by me. I'm a PhD candidate in fish aquaculture in the University of Coimbra. I also lecture in the Superior School of Tourism and Sea Technology in Peniche from the Polytechnic Institute of Leiria. Nuno Leite is a master's in ecology from the University of Coimbra. John Jones is the head of the Metabolic Control Group from the Center for Neurosciences from the University of Coimbra, and João Rito. She's a statutory auditor and she's a professor at Coimbra Business School. So we also were able to settle some partnerships with the Superior School of Tourism and Technology in Peniche, Doca Pesca, the Portuguese Institute for the Sea and Atmosphere, and also Landing Aquaculture, which is a private company specialized in designing and engineering of the recirculating aquaculture systems from the Netherlands. So traction, as a traction, I want to highlight these goals that we've been achieving in the last months. We did a market study for meager, which actually allows us to bet in meager because there is space, there is room for market of this species. We were one of the winners of the Blue Bio Value Acceleration Program, startups acceleration programs. Last year, also the feedback gathered from the mentors of this program was always positive, which is actually very good for us, and we have the March 2020 approval. But more important than all of this is the fact that we already have customers for our proof of concept production, so for our fish, because any business model will not be feasible, will not be sustainable if you don't have customers, and luckily we already have some. So now I just want to show you some renders of our design for our commercial facilities. This is the inside of the building. So each line is one separate recirculating system. You have different sizes of tanks. You have the filtration units in this side here. And so this building has, as I told you, 13,000 square meters, more or less. 175 meters long by more or less 72 meters. So, and for you to understand, you can see the size of a person right next to the tank. So it's big, but nevertheless, the land used for this amount of production is really low. So thank you very much for your attention. If you have any questions, I'll be very happy to answer.
Does anybody want to make a question? Anna? So thank you very much for your presentation. Well, we will end with João. I would like to say thank you to all the speakers that were with us today, to you all in the audience. And I would like also to say hello to Emmanuel that is watching at home and say thank you. And also to Andrea that is here with us. And I hope to see you next year or in another event. Thank you.